I watched my predecessor disappear into Unit 47 on a Tuesday night. He walked through that rust-colored door at exactly 2:13 in the morning, and he never came back out. His truck was still in the parking lot when I arrived for my first shift 3 days later, keys in the ignition, engine cold, coffee in the cup holder, half finished. The police searched for 6 days before they gave up, said he must have wandered into the desert, heat stroke maybe, dehydration. They found nothing. Not a footprint, not a thread of clothing, nothing. But I know where he went, because on my very first night, I found the laminated card he'd left on the desk, 7 rules written in different hands, like different people had added them over the years. And at the bottom, in handwriting that was definitely his, shaky and desperate, were 4 words that should have made me quit right then. They're not just rules. The job posting didn't mention the rules. It should have. But then again, if it had, I probably wouldn't have applied, and that's exactly what they were counting on. The ad was simple. Almost too simple. Night attendant needed for storage facility in rural Arizona. Competitive pay. Minimal responsibilities. Must be comfortable working alone. I remember staring at those last 4 words on my laptop screen, the cursor blinking in the search bar like a warning I should have heeded. Must be comfortable working alone. At the time, that sounded perfect. After my divorce, after the suffocating months of well-meaning friends asking if I was okay, after the endless noise of a life that had fallen apart around me, alone sounded like exactly what I needed. I sent my resume on a Tuesday, got a call back on Wednesday, started on Friday. The facility sat 43 miles outside of Phoenix, accessible only by a 2-lane highway that cut through flat desert scrubland like a scar. The kind of road where you could drive for 20 minutes without seeing another car, where the heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves that made the horizon look liquid. I pulled up to the gate at 5:30 in the evening, the sun already sinking toward the distant mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. The sign by the entrance read Desert Vista Storage in faded letters, the paint peeling away in long strips that curled like dead skin. The owner met me at the office, a squat concrete building that looked like it had been dropped into the desert and forgotten. His name was Raymond Cobb, a man in his late 60s with skin the texture of old leather and eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. He didn't smile when he shook my hand. His grip was dry and firm, his palm calloused in a way that spoke of years of manual labor. "You're Marcus," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir." "You read the job description carefully?" "I did." "And you're comfortable working nights? Alone?" "That's why I applied." Something flickered across his face then. Not quite approval, but close. He pulled a key ring from his pocket, heavy with dozens of keys, and selected 3. They clinked together as he held them out. "Office, main gate, emergency exit by the loading area. You won't need any others. Tenants have their own access codes." I took the keys. They were warm from being in his pocket, and I found myself wondering how long he'd been holding them, waiting for me to arrive. "Shift starts at 10, ends at 6, Raymond continued, moving toward the door. "You'll do 3 rounds each night. First at 11, second at 2, last at 4:30. Rest of the time you're in the office. Paperwork's minimal, mostly just logging your rounds and any unusual activity." "Unusual activity?" He paused, his hand on the doorknob. The setting sun threw his shadow long and thin across the concrete floor. "Vehicles that shouldn't be here. Lights and units when the tenant isn't on property. Sounds you can't explain. Standard security stuff." It wasn't until we were outside, walking toward my car, that he mentioned Unit 47. The facility spread out before us in neat rows, a grid of orange roll-up doors that glowed in the dying light. Most were standard size, 10 by 10 or 10 by 20, but as we walked, I noticed one unit that stood apart from the others. It sat at the far end of the property, separated from its neighbors by at least 30 feet of empty space on either side. The door was painted a dark rust color, different from the uniform orange of all the others. and above it, barely visible in the fading light, I could make out the number 47. "That unit's different," Raymond said, following my gaze. "Has its own set of rules." "Rules?" "You'll find them in the office, laminated card in the top desk drawer. You read them tonight before your first round. You follow them exactly, no exceptions." "What kind of rules?" "The kind that keep you safe." He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his shirt pocket, shook one out and lit it. The flame from his lighter illuminated his face for a moment, and I saw something there I couldn't quite name. Not fear, exactly, more like resignation. "The tenant pays triple rate. Been here longer than I've owned the place. Never late on rent, never causes problems as long as the rules are followed." "What happens if they're not?" He took a long drag, exhaled slowly. The smoke hung in the still air between us. "Let's just say there's a reason the position opens up regularly." That should have been my first real warning. Not the only warning, mind you. There had been smaller ones. The way Raymond's hand had trembled slightly when he handed me the keys. The fact that he'd interviewed me over the phone, asked almost no questions, hired me on the spot. The isolation of the facility itself, miles from anything resembling civilization. But this was different. This was direct. This was him telling me as clearly as he probably could that something was wrong here. I didn't ask him to elaborate. I told myself it was because I needed the job, needed the money, needed the distraction. But looking back now, I think part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Some truths are better discovered slowly, in your own time, when you can convince yourself you're ready for them. Raymond finished his cigarette, ground it out under his boot, and walked back to his truck without another word. I watched him drive away, watched the dust cloud from his tires settle back onto the dirt road, watched until his taillights disappeared into the gathering dusk. Then I got back in my car, drove to the motel I'd booked 20 miles back toward Phoenix, and tried not to think about what I'd just agreed to. My first shift started 4 hours later. The facility looked different at night. During my brief tour with Raymond, it had seemed ordinary enough. Just rows of storage units baking under the Arizona sun, the kind of place people stashed their excess lives when their houses got too full. But darkness changed everything. The overhead lights created pools of harsh white illumination that somehow made the shadows between them seem deeper, more substantial. The desert beyond the chain-link fence was absolute darkness, broken only by the occasional distant light from some ranch or homestead miles away. I parked in the small employee lot next to the office and sat for a moment with the engine running, the air conditioning blasting cold air that didn't quite chase away the knot of unease in my stomach. Through the windshield, I could see the rows of units stretching away into the darkness, and at the far end, separated and distinct, Unit 47. Even from this distance, even in the dark, it looked different. The space around it seemed emptier, more vast, as if the other units were leaning away from it. I cut the engine and the desert silence rushed in. No traffic sounds, no voices, just the distant whisper of wind across sand and scrub, and underneath it, a deeper silence that pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight. The office was small and spare. A metal desk with a computer terminal, a filing cabinet, a coffee maker that looked like it dated back to the 80s, the small bathroom. And in the top drawer of the desk, exactly where Raymond had said it would be, a laminated card. I pulled it out and held it under the fluorescent lights. The text was typed in a simple, no-nonsense font, the letters slightly faded as if the card had been handled many times. At the top, in bold capitals, Unit 47 Protocols. What followed was a list of 7 rules. 1. Never approach Unit 47 between the hours of 1 and 3 in the morning. Continue your rounds past it at a distance of no less than 50 feet. Do not stop, do not linger, do not look directly at the unit door. 2. If you hear sounds coming from Unit 47, note the time in the log but do not investigate. Sounds include, but are not limited to, knocking, scraping, voices, or what may sound like someone crying. 3. The temperature around Unit 47 may drop significantly, even during summer months. This is normal. If you feel cold while passing the unit, continue moving. Do not stop to warm yourself. 4. If the light above Unit 47 is flickering or out, report it in the morning log, but do not attempt to replace it at night. 5. On rare occasions, you may see someone standing near Unit 47. If this occurs, return to the office immediately and wait until your next scheduled round. Do not approach, do not speak to them, do not acknowledge their presence. 6. If Unit 47's door is open, do not close it. Return to the office and call the emergency number posted above the desk. Remain in the office until instructed otherwise. 7. Under no circumstances should you enter Unit 47 or accept any invitation to do so, regardless of who extends that invitation. I read through the list 3 times, each reading making the knot in my stomach pull tighter. These weren't the vague, superstitious warnings you might expect at a supposedly haunted location. They were specific, detailed, written by someone who had seen things, documented things, established protocols through trial and error, written by someone who had learned these rules the hard way. My first round wasn't scheduled until 11, so I spent the next hour familiarizing myself with the facility layout, reviewing the tenant list, checking the security cameras. There were 12 cameras total, positioned to cover the main entrance, the office, and key points along the facility's perimeter. None of them pointed at Unit 47. I noticed that immediately. The camera that should have covered that section of the property was angled away, pointing instead at the unit next to it, as if deliberately avoiding 47's location. At 10:55, I grabbed my flashlight and the rounds clipboard and stepped outside. The desert night had that particular quality of silence that feels almost hostile. No insects, no birds, just the whisper of wind and the crunch of my footsteps on gravel. I started at the north end of the facility, checking each row methodically, looking for anything out of place. Lights that shouldn't be on, locks that had been tampered with, vehicles that didn't belong. Everything was quiet, normal. The tenants' units sat locked and dark, keeping their secrets. It took me 20 minutes to work my way south, following the path that would take me past Unit 47. My watch read 11:17, safely outside the 1 to 3 window specified in the first rule. But as I approached the area, I felt something shift in the air. The temperature dropped, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed it through my uniform shirt. Enough that my breath started showing in small clouds, despite the fact that it had been 90 degrees when my shift started. I kept my distance, maintaining the 50 feet specified in the rules, and continued walking. But I couldn't help glancing toward the unit. The door was closed, the lock was in place, the overhead light was on, casting a small circle of illumination that seemed dimmer than the other lights, as if the bulb was older or the fixture was dirty. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, but I felt watched. It's a particular sensation being observed, something primal in the human brain that recognizes the weight of another's gaze even when you can't see them. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My pace quickened slightly, my feet moving faster without any conscious decision to do so. I kept my eyes forward, following the first rule, not looking directly at the unit. But in my peripheral vision, I swear I saw movement, a shadow shifting against the orange door, something adjusting its position in the darkness. I completed the rest of the round at nearly double speed and returned to the office with my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside, with the door locked and the lights on, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, the power of suggestion. A new job in an unfamiliar place, strange rules designed to spook the night watchman, my mind playing tricks in the dark. It was the rational explanation, the sensible explanation. But I couldn't stop thinking about that shadow, the way it had moved, deliberate, purposeful, tracking me as I passed. The logbook sat on the desk, a simple spiral notebook with entries dating back months. I flipped through the pages, reading the previous night attendance notes. Most were routine, rounds completed, no incidents, everything secure. But scattered throughout were other entries that made my skin crawl. October 3rd, 2:14 in the morning. Sounds from Unit 47. Banging. Lasted approximately 7 minutes. Did not investigate per protocols. October 7th, 4:32 in the morning. Temperature drop near Unit 47. Visible breath. Continued past at distance. October 12th, 1:43 in the morning. Someone standing near Unit 47. Male, approximately 6 feet tall. Returned to office, resumed rounds at 2:15. The entries continued, similar incidents repeating every few days, sometimes multiple times in a single night. And then, abruptly, they stopped. The last entry was dated October 28th, written in a hand that looked shaky, the letters uneven. Cannot do this anymore. If you're reading this, get out while you can. This place is wrong. Unit 47 is wrong. The rules won't protect you forever. That entry was from 9 days ago. I was the 4th person to hold this position in as many months. If these stories are making you check your locks tonight, consider subscribing for more horror stories every week. My second round started at 2 in the morning, right in the middle of the window when I wasn't supposed to go near Unit 47. I stood in the office doorway with the flashlight in my hand, looking out at the dark facility, and seriously considered just staying inside until 3. The rules said to maintain my rounds, but the rules also said to avoid the unit during these hours, which took precedence. In the end, it was pride that pushed me forward. Stupid male pride that didn't want to admit fear, that couldn't accept the idea of hiding in an office because of a list of rules that probably weren't even real. So I started the round, telling myself I'd just skip that section of the facility, check the north and east areas, save the south end with Unit 47 for the next round after 3. But the facility had other ideas. I was checking the units in the middle section, about halfway through my round, when I heard it. A sound like metal scraping against concrete, long and drawn out, coming from the direction of the south end, from the direction of Unit 47. The sound echoed across the empty facility, clear and distinct in the desert silence. Deliberate, like something heavy being dragged across the ground. I stopped walking. Rule 2 said if I heard sounds from Unit 47, I should note the time, but not investigate. I pulled out my phone, checked the time, 2:13 in the morning, noted it, started to continue my round. The scraping stopped, and in the sudden silence I heard something else. A voice, distant and thin but unmistakably human. It was calling my name. Marcus. My blood ran cold. I stood frozen between 2 rows of storage units, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and listened to my name being called from the direction of a unit I'd never approached, by a voice that shouldn't know who I was. Marcus, help me. The voice was wrong. That was the only way I could describe it. The words were right, the tone was pleading, but underneath there was something off, like audio that had been artificially pitch-shifted. Like someone trying to mimic human speech but not quite getting it right. Every instinct I had screamed at me to return to the office, but another part of me, the part that had pushed me to take this job in the first place, the part that was tired of running from things, wanted to know, needed to know. What was in Unit 47? Who was calling my name? How did they know it? I took 3 steps toward the south end before I caught myself, before the rational part of my brain overrode the curiosity and reminded me what the rules had said. Do not investigate. Do not approach. I turned and walked quickly back toward the office, my footsteps loud in the gravel, my breathing loud in my ears. Behind me, the voice continued to call my name, growing louder, more insistent, and underneath the voice I heard that scraping sound again, accompanied now by what sounded like footsteps, heavy, slow, getting closer. I didn't run. Something told me running would be worse, but I walked fast, my hand gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles ached, my eyes fixed on the office door ahead. The sounds followed me halfway across the facility before they stopped abruptly, cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. Inside the office, I locked the door, closed the blinds, and sat at the desk with my hands shaking. I opened the logbook and wrote down what had happened, my handwriting barely legible.
2:13 in the morning. Sounds from Unit 47. Voice calling my name. Continued past per protocols. Did not investigate. The words looked inadequate on the page, clinical and distant, unable to capture the genuine terror I'd felt standing in that darkness, hearing my name spoken by something that shouldn't have known it. I called Raymond. It was 2:30 in the morning, but I didn't care. The phone rang 6 times before he picked up, his voice thick with sleep. This better be important. It's Marcus, from the storage facility. I need to ask you something. A pause. I heard sheets rustling, the sound of him sitting up. What happened? Unit 47. I heard something. It was calling my name. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, more awake, more careful. Did you approach it? No, I followed the rules. But how did it know my name? How is that possible? You signed paperwork when I hired you. Your name's in the system. That's all it needs. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't explain anything. No, Raymond agreed. It doesn't. But I told you there were rules for a reason. You follow them, you'll be fine. You start asking questions, start trying to understand it, that's when you get into trouble. What's in that unit? I don't know. You own the facility, and I've never been inside Unit 47. Neither has anyone else who's worked here, not in the 15 years I've owned it. The tenant pays in cash, 6 months in advance, dropped off in the mail slot. No name, no contact information, just the money and a note reminding me that the unit is not to be disturbed under any circumstances. That's insane. You're telling me you rent out a unit to someone you've never met, and you just accept that? I'm telling you that I tried to evict them once, 7 years ago. Went down there with bolt cutters, planning to clear out the unit and find a normal tenant. I got within 20 feet of the door and my nose started bleeding. Not a little bit. I'm talking gushing blood, like someone had turned on a faucet. By the time I got back to my truck, I'd lost so much blood I passed out. Woke up in the hospital. Took a week before I could go back to the facility. The bleeding stopped the moment I decided not to pursue the eviction. I didn't say anything. Couldn't say anything. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, that there had to be another explanation. But I'd heard my name called from Unit 47. I'd felt the temperature drop. I'd seen the shadow move.
Listen to me carefully, Raymond said. You follow the rules exactly as they're written. You don't try to be clever. You don't try to understand. You do your job, you collect your paycheck, and you leave it alone. That's how you survive there. He hung up before I could ask anything else. I sat in the office until 3:15, watching the clock tick past 3, past the window when I was forbidden from approaching Unit 47. Then I grabbed my flashlight and forced myself to finish the round. The south end of the facility was quiet now. The temperature was normal. The door to Unit 47 was closed, the lock in place, the overhead light burning steady. But as I walked past, maintaining my 50-foot distance, I felt that sensation again, the weight of being watched. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever was in that unit was still aware of me, still focused on me, still waiting. These stories get even darker. If you're enjoying this, hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. The rest of that first night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed some invisible threshold, that by hearing my name called from Unit 47, by acknowledging its presence even indirectly, I'd somehow registered on its awareness in a way I couldn't undo. The feeling stayed with me through my last round at 4:30, through my drive back to the motel as the sun rose, through the hours I spent lying in bed trying to sleep and failing. I returned the next night because I needed the money, because I needed the distraction, because some stubborn part of me refused to be driven away by rules and shadows and voices in the dark. But I came prepared. I'd spent the day researching the facility, digging through public records, trying to find some rational explanation for what was happening. Desert Vista Storage had opened in 1997, built by a developer named Thomas Hessling, who'd made his fortune in commercial real estate.
The facility had changed hands 3 times since then, each owner selling after an average of 5 years. No complaints, no incidents, at least none that made it into public record. But when I cross-referenced the addresses of the previous owners, I found something interesting. All 3 of them had moved out of state within 6 months of selling the facility. One to Oregon, one to Maine, one to Florida, as far from Arizona as they could get while staying in the continental United States. That seemed like more than coincidence. I tried to find information about the land itself, about what had been there before the storage facility was built. The county records showed it had been undeveloped desert for decades, part of a larger parcel that had been subdivided in the 90s. Before that, the records got murky. Some references to homesteading in the early 1900s, but nothing definitive. The kind of empty land that accumulates stories the way it accumulates dust, half-forgotten tales that might or might not be true. My second night started the same as the first. I arrived at 10, reviewed the rules again even though I'd memorized them, started my rounds at 11. But this time, I brought a digital thermometer. I wanted proof. I needed to know if the temperature drop around Unit 47 was real or just in my head. The first round was uneventful. I passed Unit 47 at the prescribed distance, felt the cold, checked my thermometer. It read 58 degrees near the unit compared to 84 degrees 20 feet away. A 26-degree drop across a distance of less than 30 feet with no apparent source. That wasn't imagination. That wasn't coincidence. I logged it in the book. 11:26. Temperature drop verified at Unit 47. No other unusual activity. The 2 o'clock round was when things escalated. I'd learned from the first night, so I planned my route to avoid the south end during the forbidden hours. I started early at 1:55, figuring I'd complete the accessible sections and be ready to check Unit 47's area right at 3. But as I was checking the east row of units, I heard that sound again, the metal on concrete scraping, coming from Unit 47, and then a moment later what sounded like someone pounding on the inside of a door. Bang, bang, bang. 3 heavy impacts that echoed across the facility. I checked my watch. 2:07. Still in the window, still forbidden from approaching. The pounding continued, regular, insistent, like someone trapped and desperate to get out. And underneath it, I heard that voice again. Not calling my name this time, just speaking. Low and continuous, the words too distant to make out, but the tone unmistakable, pleading, desperate. Every decent instinct I had told me to help. Someone was in trouble. Someone was trapped. That's what those sounds meant, what that voice communicated. But I remembered what Raymond had said. The rules aren't suggestions. They're survival instructions. So I stood there, frozen between rows of storage units, listening to someone beg for help, and did nothing. Because the rules said not to approach, because I was afraid of what I'd find if I did. The pounding stopped at 2:14. I noted the time, waited until 2:20, then resumed my rounds, taking a route that kept me as far from Unit 47 as the facility allowed. When I finally passed it at 3:05, it was silent. The door was closed, the temperature was normal, but on the ground in front of the door, clearly visible in the overhead light, were marks in the dust. Long, parallel scratches, like something had been dragged away from the unit and back toward the surrounding desert. I documented everything in the log, my entries getting longer and more detailed with each incident. Part of me hoped that by writing it down, by treating it like an official record, I could maintain some sense of control over the situation. But reading back over what I'd written, I realized I was just building a case file, evidence for whoever came after me. Around 4 in the morning, I decided to look through the filing cabinet in the office. It seemed important to know what I was dealing with, and if Raymond wouldn't tell me, maybe the facility's own records would. The cabinet wasn't locked. Inside, I found tenant files organized alphabetically, rental agreements, maintenance logs, the usual administrative detritus of a small business. Unit 47's file was thicker than the others. I pulled it out and spread the contents across the desk. The rental agreement was bizarre. It was handwritten, not printed, dated July 7th, 1997, just 3 weeks after the facility had opened. The tenant section was blank. No name, no address, no contact information. Just a signature at the bottom, a sprawling, unreadable scrawl that didn't look like any signature I'd ever seen. It looked more like something drawn than written, angular and sharp, with points that seemed to press through the paper. The terms were simple: 10 by 20 unit, triple the standard rate, paid 6 months in advance, automatic renewal, no inspections, no access by facility personnel under any circumstances. Violations would result in immediate and severe consequences for the facility owner. That last line was underlined 3 times. Beneath the rental agreement were payment records, envelopes, dozens of them, each containing exactly the amount due for 6 months' rent, all cash, all with the same postmark from a town called Mercy, Arizona. I looked up Mercy on my phone. It was a ghost town, abandoned in the 1920s after a mine collapse killed 42 people. There was no post office there, hadn't been for 100 years. But the letters kept coming, every 6 months, always on time.
I kept digging through the file and found something else. Incident reports, dozens of them, written by previous night attendants, documenting everything from the mundane to the inexplicable. Temperature anomalies, check. Sounds from the unit, check. Voices calling names, check. But there were others, entries I hadn't experienced yet, descriptions that made my hands start shaking as I read them. An attendant who reported seeing someone walk into Unit 47 and never come out, despite the fact that no one entered the facility and the door never opened. Another who described waking up at the desk to find himself outside, standing in front of Unit 47 with his hand on the lock, with no memory of how he'd gotten there. A third who quit after finding bloody handprints on the door at 3 in the morning, handprints that disappeared when he went to photograph them. One report, dated just 6 months ago, stopped me cold. The attendant, a man named Richard Chen, described spending 3 hours one night trying to ignore sounds from Unit 47, crying, screaming, what he described as sounds of suffering that went on and on without stopping. He'd followed the rules, stayed away, logged everything, but at the end of his report he'd added a handwritten note. I think someone's dying in there. I think they've been dying in there for a long time. I can't do this anymore. I'm quitting, effective immediately. Richard Chen's resignation was the last entry in the file before my hiring paperwork. I sat back in the desk chair, trying to process what I was reading. This wasn't just some weird tenant with strange requirements. This was something systemic, something that had been happening since the facility opened, something that every owner and every attendant had experienced, documented, and ultimately fled from. The question wasn't, what's in Unit 47? The question was, why hasn't anyone done anything about it? I called Raymond again, even though it was 4:30 in the morning. I read the file, I said when he picked up. He was quiet for a long time. Then, you shouldn't have done that. Why hasn't anyone called the police? Why hasn't anyone investigated? We have, 3 different times over the years. 3 different times they came out, looked at the door, looked at the lock, and walked away. Wouldn't say why, just said there was nothing they could do and we should leave it alone. That's insane. You keep saying that, but you're still there. You're still working, which means some part of you understands that this isn't a situation where normal rules apply. What is it? What's really in that unit? I don't know, and I don't want to know. That's the point.
The rules exist to create distance, to keep us separate from whatever's in there. You follow them, it stays contained. You start asking questions, start digging deeper, you weaken that separation. So we just, what? Let it continue? Forever? Marcus, there are things in this world that don't have explanations, things that don't fit into the categories we've built to make sense of reality. Unit 47 is one of them. The best thing you can do, the only thing you can do, is follow the rules and collect your paycheck. That's it. That's the job. He hung up again. I finished my shift, did my final round at 4:30 and left as the sun was coming up. But I didn't go back to the motel. Instead, I drove to the county library in Phoenix, waited for it to open at 9, and started searching through their local history archive. The librarian, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, helped me pull microfiche records for the area where Desert Vista Storage now stood. We went back to the 1900s, then further into the territorial period before Arizona was a state. Most of it was dry reading, census records, land claims, the usual documentation of expansion and settlement. But then I found something. A newspaper article from 1898 buried in the back pages of the Territorial Observer. The headline read, "Strange Disappearances Continue Near Mercy Mine." The article described a series of vanishings in the area south of what was then the small mining town of Mercy. 7 people gone in the span of 3 months. No bodies, no evidence, just people who walked into the desert and never came back. The article noted that local Apache avoided the area, calling it the hungry place. They believed something lived there, something that fed on travelers. The paper dismissed this as superstition, but I noticed that the disappearances stopped after the article ran. Not because they were solved, but because people stopped going near that part of the desert. I kept searching, found more references scattered through the years. Incidents, disappearances, reports of strange sounds in the desert night, all in roughly the same area, all dismissed or forgotten. And then, in 1964, a geology survey that noted anomalous readings in the vicinity, temperature fluctuations, magnetic field distortions, things that shouldn't happen naturally. The survey had been abandoned, no explanation given. I drove back to the storage facility that afternoon, 3 hours before my shift started, parked in the employee lot and walked the property in daylight, looking at Unit 47 from a safe distance. It looked ordinary, just another storage unit with a rust-colored door and a padlock, but the space around it was different. The desert scrub grew right up to the fence line everywhere else on the property, but around Unit 47 there was nothing, just bare dirt in a perfect circle, maybe 60 feet in diameter, with the unit at its center. Nothing grew there. Nothing lived there. I stood at the edge of that dead zone and understood, finally, what I was dealing with. This wasn't about a weird tenant or strange coincidences. Unit 47 wasn't a storage unit at all. It was a container, a boundary, something built on top of something else, designed to keep whatever was there from spreading. And I was the person paid to make sure that boundary held. That realization should have made me quit. Should have sent me running back to Phoenix, back to my normal life, back to anything that wasn't this. But I didn't. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the same impulse that had brought me here in the first place, the need to understand, to witness, to document the inexplicable. Or maybe, and this is what scared me most, maybe working nights at Desert Vista Storage was exactly where I was supposed to be. The third night, things changed. I arrived for my shift with a new perspective, a new understanding of what my job actually was. I wasn't just a night attendant, I was a guardian, someone who stood watch over something that needed watching. The rules weren't arbitrary security theater, they were containment protocols, refined over decades by people who'd learned through terrible experience what worked and what didn't. I started my rounds at 11 as usual. Everything was normal in the north section, normal in the east, but when I approached the south end, maintaining my 50-foot distance from Unit 47, I noticed something new. The overhead light was flickering. Not the steady burn I'd seen before,
but a rapid strobing that turned the area around the unit into a series of snapshots. Light, dark, light, dark. Rule 4. If the light above Unit 47 is flickering or out, report it in the morning log, but do not attempt to replace it at night. I noted the time, 11:33, started to continue my round. The light stopped flickering, went completely dark, and in that darkness I saw something move. I stopped walking, my flashlight beam cutting through the night, and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. A shape, tall and thin, standing directly in front of Unit 47's door. It hadn't been there a moment ago when the light was strobing. It had simply appeared when the darkness came, as if the absence of light was what allowed it to manifest. Rule 5. On rare occasions, you may see someone standing near Unit 47. If this occurs, return to the office immediately and wait until your next scheduled round. I didn't move. I knew I should. The rule was explicit, but my feet wouldn't obey. Rooted to the gravel, my eyes locked on that impossible figure. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, maybe 7 feet or more, with limbs that seemed slightly too long, proportions that didn't quite match what a human body should look like. It stood perfectly still, facing the door, and even from 50 feet away I could feel its attention focused entirely on me. That's when it turned its head. The movement was fluid, but somehow jerky at the same time, like frames of animation that were missing their transitions. One moment it faced the door. The next, it was looking directly at me. I couldn't make out features. It was too dark, too far away. But I felt its gaze like a physical weight pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then it spoke. "Marcus, come closer." The voice was mine. Not similar to mine, not mimicking mine. It was my actual voice, my exact inflection and tone, coming from something that absolutely was not me, like someone had recorded my voice and was playing it back through a damaged speaker. The uncanny valley sensation was so strong it made me nauseous. "Marcus, I need to show you something." My legs started moving toward it. I didn't decide to walk. My body just started moving, one foot in front of the other, closing the distance between me and whatever was standing in front of Unit 47. Some part of my brain was screaming, fighting against this involuntary movement, but I couldn't stop it, couldn't control it. 40 feet, 35, 30. Just a little closer. I've been waiting for you. That last sentence broke through whatever hold the thing had on me. Waiting for you, not waiting for someone, waiting for me specifically, as if my arrival at the facility had been expected, as if I'd been selected for something. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, hit the emergency contact Raymond had programmed on my first day. It rang twice before he picked up. "I need help." My voice came out thin and strained. "Someone's at Unit 47. It's using my voice. I'm walking toward it and I can't stop." "Get down on the ground," Raymond said immediately. "Right now, don't argue, just do it." I dropped to my knees, then flat on my stomach, the gravel biting into my cheek. My legs were still trying to move, still trying to carry me forward, but gravity and friction won. I couldn't walk if I wasn't standing. "Stay down. Cover your ears. Don't look at it. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. I lay on the ground with my hands pressed over my ears, my eyes squeezed shut, and felt the thing's presence moving closer. I couldn't hear it walking, but I could feel it. The air pressure changed. The temperature dropped even further. My breath clouded in front of my face, visible even with my eyes closed from the cold burning my skin. Then I felt something touch my shoulder, light, almost gentle, like someone checking if I was okay. But wrong, so deeply wrong that every cell in my body screamed in recognition of something fundamentally opposed to life, to warmth, to the basic structure of reality I'd always taken for granted. "Look at me, Marcus." I kept my eyes closed, kept my hands over my ears,
but I could feel it leaning down, bringing itself closer to my level, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. I can make this stop. I can make everything stop. The pain, the loneliness, the endless questions. All you have to do is look at me. All you have to do is let me show you what's inside. I don't know how long I lay there. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Time did strange things when that thing was close, stretched and compressed like taffy. But eventually, I heard another sound cutting through the ringing in my ears. A truck engine, tires on gravel, a door slamming. "Get away from him." Raymond's voice, rough and commanding. I risked opening my eyes just enough to see him standing 20 feet away with something in his hands. It looked like a road flare, burning bright red in the darkness. He was holding it out in front of him like a weapon, like a cross facing down a vampire. The presence on my shoulder lifted. The temperature rose slightly. When I finally dared to look around, the thing was gone, just vanished, leaving no trace it had ever been there. The overhead light at Unit 47 flickered back on, steady now, illuminating absolutely nothing unusual. Raymond helped me to my feet. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he lit a cigarette. We stood there in silence for a long moment, both of us staring at Unit 47's closed door. "What was that?" I finally asked. "That," Raymond said, taking a long drag, "is why we have the rules." He walked me back to the office, made me sit down, and poured 2 cups of terrible coffee from the ancient pot. My hands were still shaking as I wrapped them around the mug, trying to absorb the warmth. It knew my name. It used my voice. How is that possible? It knows everything about everyone who works here. Names, histories, the things you're afraid of, the things you want. It pulls them out of you the moment you step on the property, and it uses that information to find your weaknesses. What is it? Raymond sat down across from me, his coffee untouched. "I told you before that I don't know. That's still true in the sense that I don't have a word for it, don't have a category to put it in. But I know what it does. It feeds on attention, on curiosity, on the human need to understand. Every time someone looks at it, every time someone thinks about it, every time someone tries to figure out what it is, they're giving it power, making it stronger. That's why the rules tell you to ignore it, to maintain distance, to never engage. But I didn't engage. I followed the rules. You looked at it. When it appeared in the dark, you looked at it. That's all it takes. That's the crack in the armor it needs to start working on you. Most people can resist for a while, but it's patient. It has nothing but time. It'll keep trying, keep pushing, keep testing, until it finds a way in.
I thought about the incident reports I'd read, the people who'd quit, the people who'd vanished. What happened to them? The ones who broke the rules? Some of them just left, couldn't handle it. But others, he trailed off, stubbed out a cigarette. There used to be a maintenance worker here, guy named Daniel. He'd been with the facility for years, knew the rules backward and forward. But one night, something convinced him to open Unit 47's door. We found him the next morning standing in front of it, door wide open, just staring inside, catatonic. Paramedics took him away. He never spoke again. Last I heard, he's in a care facility somewhere, still staring at nothing. Jesus Christ! Yeah, so when I tell you to follow the rules, I'm not being superstitious. I'm not exaggerating. Those rules are the only thing keeping you from ending up like Daniel. He stayed with me for the rest of the shift. We completed the rounds together, Raymond maintaining an even greater distance from Unit 47 than the rules specified. Everything was quiet, normal, but I couldn't shake the memory of that touch on my shoulder, the wrongness of it, the way it had made me feel like my skin was crawling off my bones. When 6 o'clock came and the day shift attendant arrived, Raymond pulled me aside. "Take a few days off, get your head straight, figure out if you can really do this job. And if I can't, then you walk away. No judgment, no shame. This isn't a normal job, Marcus.
The pay is good because the cost is high. Not everyone can afford it. I drove back to the motel and slept for 14 hours straight. My phone turned off, my dreams full of tall figures in the dark and voices that sounded too much like my own. When I woke up, it was nighttime again. The world outside my window was dark, the motel parking lot lit by sodium lights that turned everything orange and strange. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to decide what to do. The smart thing would be to quit, pack my bags, drive back to Phoenix, find a normal job that didn't involve supernatural containment protocols. But I kept thinking about what Raymond had said, about Daniel, about all the people who'd encountered whatever was in Unit 47 and lost themselves to it. If I quit, someone else would be hired, someone who'd go through the same experiences I'd gone through, someone who might not be as lucky as I'd been. The rules worked, that much was clear. They'd been refined through trial and error, tested and proven over decades. As long as someone followed them exactly, the thing in Unit 47 stayed contained. The problem wasn't the rules. The problem was people, our curiosity, our need to understand, our inability to leave well enough alone. But what if someone could follow the rules? What if someone could maintain that boundary without giving in to the temptation to cross it? Someone who'd already looked, already felt that wrongness, already knew what would happen if the protocols failed. I called Raymond. "I want to come back," I said, "but I need to know everything, all of it. Every incident, every theory, every piece of information you have. I can't guard something I don't understand." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Come to my house tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Bring a notebook." He gave me an address in Scottsdale and hung up. The next afternoon, I found myself sitting in Raymond Cobb's living room, surrounded by file boxes and manila folders and decades of accumulated documentation. His house was small and neat, decorated in a style that suggested a man who'd lived alone for a long time. Photos on the walls showed a younger Raymond with a woman who I assumed was his ex-wife. No children, no family visible anywhere. He'd laid out everything on his dining room table. Incident reports dating back to 1997, photographs of Unit 47 taken at different times, under different conditions, correspondence with previous owners, previous attendants, even a few letters from people who claimed to have information about what the facility was built on top of. "This is everything?" I asked. "Everything I have, everything I could find. Some of it's reliable, some of it's probably nonsense, but it's all here." I started reading. It took hours. Raymond made coffee, ordered pizza, and let me work in silence, occasionally answering questions, but mostly just letting me absorb the information. The picture that emerged was complicated and terrifying. Unit 47 wasn't the first containment structure on this site. According to a letter from a previous owner, there had been something here before the storage facility was built, some kind of cinder block structure, small and windowless, that the developer had found when he was surveying the land. He'd tried to demolish it, but every crew he hired refused after spending time on site. They reported feeling watched, hearing sounds, finding equipment moved or damaged overnight. Eventually, he gave up and just built around it, incorporating it into the storage facility design as Unit 47. But that structure wasn't the beginning either. Another document, this one handwritten and hard to read, suggested that native peoples in the area had marked this spot long before European settlement, had built cairns around it, had performed rituals to keep something dormant. When those rituals stopped, when the knowledge was lost, the thing began to stir. What was it? The theories ranged from the supernatural to the pseudo-scientific, a dimensional weak point where reality was thinner than it should be, a portal to somewhere else, the preserved consciousness of something that died badly. One theory suggested it was a kind of psychic black hole, something that pulled in and trapped human attention, human awareness, growing stronger with every mind that touched it.
I found Daniel's file, the maintenance worker Raymond had mentioned. His incident report was detailed and clinical, written by the officer who'd responded to the call. Subject found standing approximately 3 feet from open door of storage unit 47, unresponsive to verbal commands. Eyes fixed on interior of unit, pupils dilated, breathing shallow. Paramedics report subject appeared catatonic with no obvious physical injury. Subject transported to Desert Regional Medical Center for psychiatric evaluation. There was a follow-up report from a detective who'd tried to interview Daniel 3 days later. No response obtained. Subject continues to stare at fixed point in space. Shows no recognition of surroundings or persons present. EEG shows normal brain activity, but patient appears unable or unwilling to respond to external stimuli. Cause unknown. That report was dated 8 years ago. Daniel was still alive, still catatonic, still staring at whatever he'd seen inside Unit 47. What was inside? I asked Raymond. When the door was open, what was inside the unit? Nothing, just empty space. That's what everyone says who's looked. It's completely empty. But people who look inside don't come back right. Even people who just glance. It does something to them, changes something fundamental. I thought about that, tried to imagine what could be so terrible that just seeing it could break a person's mind. Not gore or violence or anything physical, something worse, something that violated the basic assumptions human consciousness needed to function. As the sun set and the room grew dark, Raymond turned on lamps and made more coffee. We kept working, kept piecing together the puzzle, until I felt like I had as complete a picture as anyone probably could. It wasn't satisfying, it didn't provide answers, but it gave me context. It helped me understand what I was dealing with. "One more thing," Raymond said, pulling out a final folder. "You need to see this." Inside were photos taken by a trail camera that had been set up behind the facility, pointed at the area around Unit 47. The images were dated, time-stamped, taken at regular intervals throughout the night. Most showed nothing, just the storage unit, the overhead light, the empty ground. But in a few of them, scattered throughout the weeks and months, there were figures, dozens of them. They appeared in the dead zone around Unit 47, always between 1 and 3 in the morning, always during the forbidden window. Some looked human, others didn't. They stood in circles around the unit, were pressed close to the door, or simply wandered through the frame like they were lost. "What are they?" I asked Raymond. What was the wrong question? The right question is, what were they? I think they're people who got too close, people who broke the rules, people who opened the door or went inside, or just looked too long. I think that thing doesn't kill people. It traps them, keeps them there in that space, forever. I stared at the photos, at the dozens of figures surrounding Unit 47, at what might be Daniel standing in multiple shots, his posture never changing, at others whose faces were turned toward the camera, their expressions frozen in something that might have been terror or might have been understanding. "So when it called my name," I said slowly, "when it used my voice and tried to get me to come closer, it was trying to add you to the collection. That's what I think. It doesn't just feed on attention, it consumes it, takes people's consciousness, their awareness, and keeps it, stores it, uses it, and the more it has, the stronger it gets." I drove back to the motel that night with Raymond's words echoing in my head. Takes people's consciousness and keeps it. The idea was more disturbing than any ghost or monster could be. This wasn't about death, it was about something worse, a kind of imprisonment that continued beyond physical existence, trapping some essential part of a person in a space outside normal reality. But I also felt something else, a strange sense of purpose. If the thing in Unit 47 was a trap for human consciousness, then the rules weren't just containment protocols, they were liberation instructions. By following them, by maintaining that boundary, I wasn't just protecting myself, I was protecting everyone who might work here after me, everyone who might accidentally wander too close, everyone who might be lured in by voices that sounded like people they loved. I returned to work the next night with new resolve. The weeks that followed fell into a strange routine. I learned to navigate the facility without thinking about Unit 47 too much, learned to do my rounds efficiently, checking the required areas without letting my attention linger.
The incidents continued, of course. The temperature drops, the sounds, the occasional figure in the darkness. But I documented everything clinically, treated each occurrence as data rather than personal threat. I also started noticing patterns. The activity at Unit 47 followed cycles. Some nights were quiet, almost normal. Others were intense, with multiple incidents across a single shift. The intense periods seemed to correlate with certain dates, though I couldn't figure out the pattern at first. Not lunar cycles, not holidays or anniversaries. Then I checked the rental payment schedule and understood. The activity spiked in the days leading up to when rent was due, like the thing was reminding us of the arrangement, flexing its presence, proving that it could cause problems if the containment wasn't maintained. I shared this observation with Raymond, and he nodded slowly. That makes sense. The payment isn't just rent, it's tribute. We're paying it to stay contained, to follow the rules. But who's receiving the payment? Where does the money go? Nowhere, really. It comes in those envelopes. I deposit it in the facility account. I pay expenses. But the act of payment is what matters. The acknowledgement that there's a transaction, a contract. We provide containment, and it provides, non-interference with the rest of the facility? Containment within Unit 47's immediate area? It's all theory. What happens if we stop paying? Raymond looked at me like I'd suggested juggling chainsaws. We don't even consider that, ever. But I was considering it. Not stopping the payments exactly, but understanding the mechanism. If the thing in Unit 47 operated on contracts, on agreements, then there were rules governing its behavior too. Limitations, things it could and couldn't do based on the terms of the arrangement. That thought led me down a new research path. I started looking into the history of containment structures, found references to similar phenomena in other locations, always in isolated areas, always with specific rules, always with some kind of tribute or payment system. It was like discovering an entire shadow economy, deals struck between human institutions and things that shouldn't exist, transactions that kept the normal world functioning by paying off the abnormal. There were others like me. I found their accounts online, buried in forums and obscure blogs. Night attendants at facilities with special units, security guards at museums with certain exhibits, lighthouse keepers on islands where specific protocols had to be followed. We didn't communicate directly, that seemed to violate some unspoken rule, but we documented our experiences, left breadcrumbs for the next person, built an informal knowledge base about how to survive in these liminal spaces. The thing I learned from these accounts was simple but important. The rules worked, but only if you committed to them completely. Half measures failed. Trying to be clever failed. The things we guarded were patient, and they waited for the moment when someone's discipline slipped, when curiosity outweighed caution, when someone decided they knew better than decades of accumulated wisdom. I wasn't going to make that mistake. 2 months into the job, something changed. I arrived for my shift to find Raymond's truck already in the parking lot. That was unusual. He typically left long before I arrived, our schedules overlapping briefly at shift change. But tonight he was waiting in the office, his face drawn, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had clearly gone cold hours ago. "We have a problem," he said. He showed me an envelope that had arrived in today's mail. Same style as the rental payments, same postmark from the ghost town of Mercy, but this one didn't contain money. Instead, there was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message. "The contract requires renewal. A witness is needed. Instructions to follow." "What does that mean?" I asked. "I don't know. This has never happened before. The rental just automatically renewed every 6 months. There was never any requirement for witnesses or special instructions. When's the next renewal date?" 3 days from now, July 7th. The anniversary of the original rental agreement, 28 years to the day. We sat in the office as the sun set, both of us staring at that message, trying to understand what it meant. A contract renewal ceremony? Some kind of ritual? And what role was I supposed to play as the witness? The answer came the next night.
I was doing my 2 o'clock round, the one that required me to avoid Unit 47's immediate area, when I heard something different. Not the usual sounds, not scraping or knocking or voices. Music. Faint and distant, but unmistakably music. Old music, like something from a scratchy vinyl record. A slow, haunting melody that made my skin prickle. It was coming from Unit 47. I stopped walking, listened. The music continued, and underneath it I heard something else. Voices. Multiple voices, speaking in unison, words I couldn't quite make out. Like a ceremony. Like a ritual. I should have returned to the office immediately. That's what the rules said. Any unusual activity, any deviation from documented patterns required immediate withdrawal and documentation. But something about that music held me in place. It wasn't threatening. It was almost welcoming, like an invitation. Marcus. My name, spoken from the direction of Unit 47. But this time it wasn't my voice calling me. It was Raymond's voice. Perfect mimicry, down to the gravel in his tone, the slight rasp from decades of cigarettes. Marcus, come to the office. We need to talk about the renewal ceremony. I turned and started walking toward the office, my instincts screaming that something was wrong. Raymond's truck wasn't in the parking lot. He wasn't here. Whatever was using his voice, it wasn't him. Marcus, please, I need your help with this. The voice was following me, getting closer, and underneath Raymond's words I could hear that music again, growing louder. I reached the office and locked the door behind me. Through the window, I could see the south end of the facility. Unit 47's overhead light was flickering again, that rapid strobing that had preceded my first direct encounter with the thing. And in those flashes of light and darkness, I saw figures, dozens of them, all standing in that dead zone around the unit, all facing in my direction. They started walking toward the office, moving in perfect synchronization, their steps matching exactly, like they were one thing wearing multiple bodies, like they were puppets controlled by a single intelligence. I called Raymond. He picked up on the first ring. It's happening. Whatever the renewal is, it's starting early. Don't leave the office. Don't open the door for anyone. I'm calling someone. Who? Someone who might be able to help. Just stay inside. The figures reached the halfway point between Unit 47 and the office. They stopped walking. And then, all at once, they spoke. The contract requires renewal. A witness is needed. You were chosen. Their voices layered over each other, creating a sound that was almost musical, almost beautiful, almost hypnotic. But underneath the beauty was something else, something hungry, something that had been waiting a long time for this moment. The original terms must be validated. The boundary must be reaffirmed. This is the way it has always been done. I looked at the calendar. July 5th, 2 days before the renewal date. Whatever ceremony they were describing, it was starting ahead of schedule. That seemed important, seemed like a deviation from protocol that might mean something. The figures stood motionless, waiting, watching, their eyes all fixed at the office, on me. That's when the second envelope arrived. Not through the mail, it simply appeared on the desk in front of me, materializing out of nothing, the same style as all the others, same postmark for mercy that shouldn't exist. I picked it up with shaking hands and opened it. Inside was another message, this one longer, written in that same spidery script. The witness must see, the witness must know, the witness must confirm that the terms are honored. On the night of renewal, at the hour of binding, the witness will be called to Unit 47. The door will open. The witness will look inside and speak the words of continuation. Only then will the contract be renewed. Only then will the boundary hold. Failure to witness voids the contract. The containment ends. The boundary falls. That which has been held will be free.
At the bottom of the page was a single line in different handwriting, newer, clearer. "This is not a request." My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the paper. They wanted me to go to Unit 47, to look inside, to see whatever had broken Daniel and God knows how many others. And if I refused, if I followed every instinct for self-preservation and stayed away, the containment would fail. I was being forced to choose between my own safety and everyone else's, between following the rules that had kept me alive and breaking them to keep the rest of the world safe.
Raymond burst through the office door 30 minutes later with another person, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and deep-set eyes that held a lifetime of hard-earned knowledge. She carried a leather bag that clinked when she set it down, and she smelled of sage and something else, something old. "This is Dr. Sarah Whitmore," Raymond said. "She's a folklorist, specializes in—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Containment rituals," Dr. Whitmore said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I've studied similar phenomena at other sites. Your Raymond called me because I helped establish protocols at a facility in Nevada 30 years ago. Different entity, same basic principle." She sat down at the desk and read the message I'd received. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her grip tighten on the paper. "They're escalating. That's very unusual. The standard pattern is that these contracts auto-renew indefinitely. Requiring a direct witness means something's changed." "Changed how?" I asked. "The entity has become stronger, more aware. When they first establish containment, these things are usually dormant or weak. But over time, if they're fed attention, if enough people interact with them, they gain power. Eventually, they reach a threshold where they can demand modification of the terms." "So what do I do?" Dr. Whitmore pulled several items from her bag: a small mirror, a bundle of dried sage, a jar of what looked like salt but darker, almost black. "You witness the renewal, but you do it on your terms, not theirs. You prepare yourself, you protect yourself, and you understand that what you see inside that unit won't be reality. It'll be a test, a trap. The entity will show you something designed to break you, just like it broke everyone else who looked. Your job is to see through it, to recognize it for what it is. And if I can't? Then you end up like Daniel. Your consciousness gets trapped, added to the collection, and the containment fails anyway because there's no witness capable of completing the renewal." That's a hell of a choice. It's the only choice. That's how these contracts work. They bind both parties. We agree to maintain the containment. The entity agrees to stay contained. But periodically, the terms must be reaffirmed by someone who understands what they're agreeing to, someone who can look at the thing directly and still choose to maintain the boundary. She spent the next hour teaching me protective techniques, visualization exercises, mental frameworks for maintaining sense of self when confronted with something that could tear consciousness apart. She had me practice the words I'd need to speak, a simple formula that sounded almost mundane. I witness this renewal. I acknowledge the terms. I confirm the continuation of containment under existing protocols. 12 words that would hopefully keep me sane and keep the thing in Unit 47 contained for another cycle. July 7th arrived too quickly. I came to work at 10 as usual, but Raymond and Dr. Whitmore were already there, preparing. They'd cleared the office, moved all the furniture against the walls, and drawn a circle on the floor with that black salt. Dr. Whitmore explained that I'd start here, grounded in this protected space, before making the walk to Unit 47. The entity will try to pull you in before you're ready. It'll use whatever it can: voices, visions, promises. You need to stay anchored to your purpose. Remember why you're doing this. To keep it contained? No, that's too abstract. You need something personal, something the entity can't twist or corrupt. What brought you here, Marcus? What made you take this job?